this is very much a historian's paper, and it accidentally turns out to be almost an illustration of what the previous speaker was talking about, what Paul was talking about. So to be honest, I was a little nervous preparing this paper because it's a bit like delivering a paper in a foreign language, which lots of people here I know are doing. And the speaking to technologists, the strains of what words mean and what technology references mean is a problem for I think for historians sometimes. So I approached a couple of historian colleagues about this paper, and they agree that there is an issue here to be discussed, and it echoes what Paul has already said. As historians, we teach students how to analyze primary source documents. These are original documents, not books about the documents, but the original documents themselves. And we use some very well-established methods for approaching a document to discover how it was made, why it came into being, and what meaning we can take from a document. Now, digital humanities is a hugely powerful tool, and it's so apparently universal that I believe that students are now using the digital research tool, the digital object, as a primary source. So it's no longer a tool for looking at something, it is the thing. My paper asks, can historians use established historical research methods to critically analyze the digital object? And I hope to do this in a very kind of, well, a workshop-like way, so bear with me if this seems a little bit primitive. The tool that I would use with first years would be DAMIT. Basically, it's a memory tool for remembering to approach the date of a document. Was it produced close to the time of the events you're looking at, or a long time afterwards? And the author, the creator, or editors of the document, those who produced it, what do we know about them? The motivation for creating it. Why did the author create it? Was it to record something? Was it to write to a superior? Was it writing to a junior? Was it to instruct someone or to denounce somebody to the secret police? Why was the record created? The intended audience is linked to the motivation. So intended audience, who's it for? Is it a personal memo, a letter to a lover? Is it a letter to an enemy or a friend or to a co-conspirator? And then finally, the test. You test how the document fits with what you already know about the historical context. And you can return to this test as you know more and more about the context. You can return to any one document and retest it if you like. So let's see how this might work for a practical example. So here we have the Daily Sketch. This is an English-produced tabloid pictorial newspaper from 1916, a couple of days after the end of the Irish 1916 Rising. And you can see here it has pictures on the front page, and it's all pictures mainly throughout, of the surrender at the end of the Rising in 1916. You see a picture there of Patrick Pearse, the guy in the top right-hand image, and he's surrendering to two British officers in front of Tesco on Parnell Street, as it is today for people who know Dublin. So the date for this is easy. It's a newspaper. It's 10th May, close to the event, so that makes it reliable in one way. The author, well, the author is interesting because it could be the photographer who took the photograph. Who was he or she? Were they a British civilian or military photographer? Was it an Irish civilian photographer? Who produced it? The editor of the newspaper decides what photographs go in. A photo editor may crop and arrange the photographs in a certain way. So they put a joint authorship, a joint authority for the photography. The motivation is simple enough here. There's 1 halfpenny price on the newspaper. So a halfpenny is very small money, but there's also possibly a political motive. Newspapers, after all, have a political motive and sell to an audience that wants to buy their political message usually. The intended audience is tied in. So this is going to be it's an English tabloid newspaper aimed at, it's mainly pictorial. This isn't the London Times, this isn't the Guardian. So fewer words are used, possibly delivering a fairly simplified message about complex events to an audience who are perhaps removed from the message. It's informing in a quite a boiled down sort of way. The test element of this, testing the answer, this is in the middle of the First World War. Many English families have menfolk, or British families have menfolk serving in the British Army, and so the identification with the army is quite strong, and the newspaper itself describes the Irish rebels as misguided fanatics. So the idea of presenting to a wartime audience is quite a specific moment in time. But we can revisit that test later on. So if we know more information, we can revisit the test in the light of new information. So here is a document written by Sean McLaughlin, and he's writing this document about 1950, about 35 years after the events. Sean McLaughlin was a junior, young rebel, member of the rebel force. He's a young socialist in the HQ, the rebel HQ, at the time the decision was made to surrender. And McLaughlin writes, Pearse, who's the leader of the rebels, Elizabeth Farrell came in with a note about negotiations with the British. Pearse himself said he'd have to go and surrender. And then the last sentence, he then shook hands with each of us in turn and went out with Elizabeth Farrell. So this is a document produced by a guy many years later, but he was in the room at the time. And you can see he's altered his own memory. He's corrected his own memory by writing in the name Elizabeth Farrell. So who is this Elizabeth Farrell? Well, we can, by adding to more information to this, a historian can do a bit of spot the difference. Here's the published photograph I showed you earlier, and then here's a version of the photograph closer to the actual photographer's product, if you like, and you can see a bit of spot the difference there. There's been some trimming done on the photograph, and the photographer or the photo editor in the daily sketch has decided to remove Nurse Bridget O'Farrell because she's sort of hidden in the background there, and this story of who's excised from the record and who's incised. Now, this is a famous story about 1916 in Ireland, so I'm not discovering anything new here, but it shows that the historian can sit and look at these documents and can say, right, I can analyze them, I know what's going on. In a similar way, you can analyze a collection or an archive. Imagine the archive that was created by a British regiment working in Dublin at the time, or the archive created by, let's say, a local labour history archive created in the middle of town during the time of the 1916 Rising from the Irish point of view, or take the archive of the rebels themselves. Well, they didn't create much of an archive because they were a secret organization, but a lot of their working papers were destroyed in the battle during the 1916 Rising. So a historian can analyze an archive and understand it, and that seems quite straightforward. But when you get to digitizing an archive, that's where the complications arise. There are digitization priorities. The speaker yesterday was talking about the expense and just the sheer work involved in digitizing and creating metadata. And this, echoing what the previous speaker was saying, this produces a problem then for the historian. Can we use the DAMIT tool for analyzing a digital repository? You can look at the date that was produced, what was the level of technological advancement when the digital archive was created, author, editor. Are the digitizing archivist and the computer scientist, are they now co-editors, co-producers of this new record? What do you know about their skills, their natural biases, their editorial decisions? The motivation for producing it could be commemorative, it could be commercial, it could be a pure research project. Who's it aimed at? So the motivation for producing could be driven by if it's a labour history document, or if it's a women's history or a regional history website that's producing different metadata that'll pull different information, and the IR are going to be slightly different. So I would argue that the test bit, this is the crucial piece where you return to the source and say, what do I know about the context? Historians, I would argue, do they have enough knowledge to do history on the digital creation and the digital editorial process? So in summary, you have all the documents that are produced by a historical event. Some of them survive, some of them are burnt, some of them are lost. They get into an archive by an archives collection policies. Within that, you have a further subset which are digitized, are sufficiently important to be digitized. Out of the ones that are digitized, metadata is created. But remember, metadata is not the same thing as the object it's describing. Metadata is a subset of the aspects of this document. And then you get search results crawling over those metadata. So the black box, I use the black box without knowing what Paul's going to talk about, but the black box is the bit we can't see into, so we can't analyze that. The results are so dramatic and are so impressive that they're very shiny, they're explosive to the historian, but they have the result of perhaps amplifying the importance of a small subset of records, and what effect does this have on the history that we're producing? So I'd be interested to get people's thoughts and views on that, speaking from a user's point of view. Thanks.